Hi, I'm Will Yorke. This is my mom, April Tinari, and it's Sunday, November 22nd, and this is our kitchen. Let's start the interview. On a scale of very good, good, fair, poor, and very poor, how would you rate your knowledge of the Bible?
I would say I have a pretty good knowledge of the Bible. I don't have a real strong memorization of scripture and verses. Like if somebody said, "Oh, what's that verse in the Bible that talks about God is love?" I would have an idea that that is from the New Testament, maybe the book of James, maybe a letter from Paul. But I don't know exactly where to go in the Bible to find that by memory. I do know how to use my concordance and how to use online resources to find Bible references and Bible verses, so that is helpful to have that as a tool. But growing up in the Catholic Church, going to church and going through CCD and receiving my sacraments, I have a very good knowledge of many of the biblical stories, probably better knowledge of New Testament than Old Testament, although a lot of the Old Testament stories, like we know from Genesis and the flood and Job and Esther, those are familiar stories that I know just from growing up in the church. After I stopped attending the Catholic Church and went to a variety of Protestant churches, I did study the Bible in small groups, Bible studies, and as well as on my own. So I'd say I have a pretty good knowledge of the Bible.
Right. How important is the question of method in interpreting Scripture?
Well, as you explained to me, there are several, probably more than you've told me in terms of interpretations of the Bible. The fundamentalist is a very literal interpretation of the Bible, and then I think you said the relativist means that there are no universal truths at all, and then the historical critical method really says that we need to base our interpretation given the time that the stories were written in the Bible, in the original language, and have more historical context of that interpretation. So I think the method for interpreting scripture is very, very important, because I think that it can lead to different conclusions. And so I think it's very important in terms of how you read and how you choose to read and understand scripture.
Do you know of any contradictions in the Genesis creation accounts between themselves?
Well, as we were preparing for this process, I did get a chance to look at Genesis, and there did seem to be some contradictions to me in the stories in Genesis 1 and then Genesis 2, where in Genesis 1, man is created on the sixth day, and then Genesis 2 starts out with God and man, and then talking about how God created all these other things on the earth, the plants and the animals for man. So that seems to be a little bit contradictory. It seemed to me that the first chapter of Genesis and the second chapter of Genesis almost had different authorship. Just the style that they were written in, the tone seemed very different. So I would say there's some contradiction there. I also then, even skipping ahead to Genesis 3 to look at where the serpent comes in as Satan, it doesn't talk about God creating Satan, although Satan took the form of the serpent. So, that leads me to something else that I say I want to read and learn more about, because in the creation story, God is there, he's creating all these good things, and now all of a sudden we have right in the next chapter, a force coming in that's not good. So it's curious to me to say I want to learn more about that, and where and how does that fit in.
Do you believe that truth cannot contradict truth?
If you're asking, is there a universal truth that cannot contradict itself, or biblical truths cannot contradict each other, I would say that I don't know. I think that, one of the things about reading the Bible and about choosing to have faith in something is faith is believing things that we don't know. And I think that probably at heart, I'm more of an agnostic than anything else, which means that I think that we can't really know much of anything. I have my own personal experiences, and I can interpret that in my own way to recognize the way that the Spirit of God is moving in my life. But at the core of really what I think is that I don't know. I don't know if what I believe is true. I don't know if there are universal truths. And based on interpretation of the scripture, it can seem like there are truths that contradict each other. But I don't know what if God intended us to interpret the scripture in such a way that we're not doing that correctly, and then everything would kind of not contradict itself. I don't know if I answered that question correctly or properly.
How do you interpret the so-called texts of terror in Scripture?
Well, I had a chance to look at these as well, from Joshua and 1 Samuel. And in both of these passages, basically, it's a historical story of God delivering the Jewish people, and did that over time in a variety of ways. And in these passages, basically, the people felt that God had told them to wipe out an entire other group of people. And so they killed men, women, children, livestock. They basically laid waste to the entire area. And I think in the historical interpretation of that, those things did happen. And that the people felt that God was on their side in those issues. But then to me, to look at, well, God has commanded us, 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill. And then here we have, oh no, God said it's okay, go kill these people because they're in our way, or they haven't treated the Israelites properly. I have trouble wrapping my mind around that. And then even today we have, or through the course of history, and today, you have people who say in the name of God that they have the right to wipe out entire other groups of people, and we call them fanatics or terrorists. And so it's difficult for me to wrap my mind around some of that. And I think it definitely needs to be interpreted in the historical context, but then also to know that the Bible is a story of the Jews in the Old Testament over that time, and how they felt that God was with them through a variety of ways that they persevered.
And lastly, what can faith communities do to better educate members on the Bible?
Well, I think that faith communities, churches, and your school, the faith community that is a school, but run by the Catholic Church. I think that there's lots of opportunities for people to learn about and study the Bible. I think that there are Bible study classes, theology classes that you're taking. I know most churches have scripture as part of the service. I would say all churches have scripture as part of the service, and then some kind of homily or sermon to kind of connect that scripture to our personal lives and interpret it, help us interpret it. And there's so many opportunities for Bible study and classes and reflections and small groups. So I think that, also with the internet, anybody who wants to on their own, as we're preparing for this interview, I have some questions, some curiosities. I certainly can go research and read and learn about that based on resources from the internet, and then decide to chat with my pastor about it. I think that it's really up to each individual person to take advantage of those opportunities that are really already in place.
All right, well, thank you for answering these questions.
Thank you. I enjoyed this project.